Hello, everyone. Welcome to Crossview's Allocation Governed webinar. Um, just a few things before we get started. I just want to set the tone for today. Allocations are usually treated as back office, but they drive some of your most critical financial decisions. Today is about why they break down across industries and what leading finance teams can do differently. Before we get started, I just want to start with a few housekeeping things. First, I want to let you know that this call is being recorded. It will be made available after. It will be sent to you and it will be on our website. Right now, your mics and cameras are both off. That's just to avoid distractions, but that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. We will be monitoring that, and there will be time for Q&A at the end of this call. Next, before we jump in, I want to quickly note that Crossview was independently evaluated in the Forrester Wave Workday Services Q2 to 2026. We were one of 14 firms selected, and we're really proud that the report speaks to our strength with mid-market and regulated industry clients, Workday-centric implementations, optimizations, and strong governance. And these are areas that align closely with the work we do every day. And with that, I'm going to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Andrew Royce. He's the Director of Product Development and our Solutions Lab lead. And then next, we have Rob Waltz, who is also a Director and a Workday Finance Architect. With that, I'll turn it over to Andrew to talk through today's agenda.
Yeah, first off, thank you for the introduction, Julie. We did allot 60 minutes for this call. I don't anticipate we'll use all 60 minutes, so hopefully we'll be able to give you some time back at the end. We'll begin by first framing the allocation problem, why allocations are a growing business risk, and where they're breaking down. We're observing these patterns repeatedly across our customers. How those customer scenarios are shaped, how the problem shows up across nonprofits, government entities, financial services, and healthcare. Then the third section will be a brief introduction to Crossview Allocate, which is our platform APIs for managing the allocation problem. We'll put forward a brief demo that walks you through really what we call the governed loop of allocations, really a framework for how to circumvent some of the problems that we're seeing with allocations across our customer base and just across complex financial operations in general. And then finally, as Julia alluded to, we will be receiving some questions in the chat. So we'll allot some time to answering those questions, both myself and my colleague Rob. So I think it's really important to frame allocations or reframe allocations as not a back office problem. Really, they shape margin, they shape recovery, reimbursement, compliance, and genuinely most teams really can't explain how they work. So, first off, allocations are foundational. They decide how cost and revenue land across funds, your programs, your departments. So they shape the numbers that organizational leaders actually use to make business decisions, to act on. Secondly, we're finding that most organizations have difficulty explaining their allocation processes. Most teams can't show you how a specific line in their general ledger was allocated, how it was calculated, how it was validated or audited. I think that the key reframe here is that allocations are not a back office risk. They're really a foundational board level risk. So, we've asked our customers just generally, how confident are you in allocation transparency and in your allocation processes? We found that all of the answers that we received in that survey fell into one of these three buckets. Very seldomly, customers answered that they can prove every number on demand. Um, Most often, what we see with our customers is that they're somewhat confident in their allocation transparency, but it's a very manual and slow process, typically spreadsheet driven, managed by just a few key stakeholders who have kind of that organizational knowledge kind of black boxed and siloed. And then less often are customers that are completely not confident in their allocation processes. Really what we are trying to address here are the bottom two buckets, right? Um, Correcting the manual and slow processes, and then providing the transparency that removes allocation processes from the spreadsheet with explainability, with traceability, with drill back in a way that's deterministic and can be handed off to an auditor. With that, I'll pass it to my colleague Rob to speak a little bit about how allocations break down across industries.
Thank you, Andrew. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for joining. So let's talk a little bit about where this breaks down. Allocation problems tend to be structural in nature, and they're not exclusively industry specific. And some of the challenges that we frequently see is that they're manual in nature. They often live in spreadsheets that don't have controls around them without any real traceability, and that can present quite a bit of risk. They can be opaque, and there's no clean audit trail from a posted number in your allocation result in the ledger back to the source other than that spreadsheet. There's exposure. We have funders, regulators, and auditors that expect the proof and the logic behind that when they ask for it. Essentially, the same pattern shows up in all industries, and we can see these challenges specifically frequently in nonprofit, government, financial services, and healthcare. Next slide. Great. Thank you. And as you know, the ground keeps shifting here. And as a result, it's getting harder, not easier. We have more funding sources like grants, donors, programs, lines of businesses, funds, all carrying their own set of rules and reporting obligations. There's more systems than ever. With all the specialized offerings out there today, there seems to be more to keep track of. We have ERP data, spreadsheet data, and other point-to-point tools that don't necessarily reconcile. We have increased expectations. In today's environment, the expectations are higher. We want a faster close, a deeper, more detailed reporting, and it all must be on demand and defensible as well. Essentially, we have more complexity, we have less time, and we have higher stakes. So in any industry, we have slightly different versions of the same problem. It's a real challenge. It's almost like an equalizer of sorts. But let's talk about a few different cases across nonprofit, government, financial services, and healthcare. So first, let's take a look at nonprofit. In the case of nonprofit, with some unique accounting standards, we see allocations across grants, donor restrictions, program funding, and this can get very complicated. Typically, we see F&A recovery allocations under uniform guidance using special negotiated rates. We have functional expense allocations. We have multi-funder split allocations and time and effort allocations. So why is this hard? Well, We see many funders, we see restricted dollars, which is a whole set of calculations, and single audit exposure, so that any given one of those may have a microscope put on it and prove to be desired. And they need to be clear. The allocation input and output needs to be that way. So what's the goal here? The goal is to recover every allowable dollar and have a clean audit trail upon request. Okay, and for state and local government, there's some similar challenges here. Under GASB standards, we see the need to allocate across both programs and entities under strict audit and compliance reporting. We see cost allocation plans for central services spread, grant indirect cost recovery allocations, internal service fund allocations, and program cost allocations around grant reporting. And why is this a challenge? Well, these are highly procedural and federally audited, and furthermore, they must remain publicly accountable. The goal here is a process that is governed, repeatable, and essentially audit ready. In the financial services industry, another highly regulated space, we need to see the ability to allocate across funds, portfolios, and business units with precision and clarity. We see asset under management weighted expense allocations. We see management company versus fund expense allocations. Of course, labor allocations and inter-entity cost-sharing allocations and transfer pricing. This is a challenge because investors, auditors, and regulators must have this sort of on-demand allocation clarity. And in today's world, that can cause month-end bottlenecks. So the goal is really to turn a month-end scramble into a governed, repeatable allocation run. And finally, let's chat really quickly about healthcare. Healthcare also operates under some unique reporting standards. And where do we see it? We see Medicare, Medicaid cost reporting and rate setting allocations, research and grant overhead allocations. Of course, we have shared service allocations, and then medical loss ratio and plan allocations for payers. This is a challenge because these allocations drive reimbursement and margin, and every number must survive that audit and that scrutiny. At the end of the day, the goal is to produce defensible cost allocations from service line to sponsor grant, all in one single engine. At this point, I'd like to hand this back to Andrew for a more modern approach. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Rob. So as Rob, broke broke down the allocation problem across those targeted industries, I think he's shown that the problem is really universal. And what we are offering here is a more modern approach, a simple framework that any finance team can adopt. And then we do have as I mentioned earlier, a set of platform APIs that can make management of this governed loop a little bit more tenable to our customers. So here's the framework. It begins with defining a rule. Write the allocation in plain English by percentage, driver, weighting, effort. Our APIs allow you to completely remove this definition of rules completely from the spreadsheets. So no spreadsheet formulas, no code. Additionally, the next step of this governed loop would be simulating the impact. So, January 11th, the NIH salary cap changed from $221,000 to $228,000. We would encourage firms to simulate the impact of that salary cap change prior to committing, that updated policy into their processes. Again, we provide the platform APIs that allow you to do that. The next step is really a human in the loop approval. Depending on the compliance requirements of your organization, of your funders, there may be a requirement for clear separation of duties. The person writing the policies or updating the policies may not necessarily be the person who is responsible for approving a policy or updating some rules and putting those rules into production. Again, we give you the APIs that support really robust and customizable human approval change. So, that's a very key concept and a very core part of our framework. Next, you can actually run the allocation. This means applying the rules and the policies that you defined previously against real input data, what we call the fact schema of your organization. From there, you can review the allocation run. You can optionally put another layer of approvals there to essentially validate the results prior to posting to your general ledger. And then finally, and what we're most excited about is the ability to trace and prove every outcome, every single allocated line. We can drill back to the exact policy sets, the exact version of those policies, the exact snapshot of input data that those allocation lines were generated from, as well as the people who approved it. A key principle here is this idea of determinism, meaning that given a set of input data, given specific policies, you can actually rerun that same set of data anytime and get the exact same result. Our framework is completely deterministic and really gives you the tools to defend your allocations to an auditor. So in a quick moment, we'll show you a live walkthrough of our platform APIs being used. One thing I want you guys to see is the ability to simulate the effects of a policy change prior to running it. I want you guys to pay attention to how we can trace the results back to the rules that defined the allocation run. And then finally, I want to demonstrate the ability for a third party, whether it's an internal controller or even an auditor, to essentially confirm the exact set of data and policies that went in to a given allocation run via what we're calling an evidence pack. So really, this is all just to show you that allocations do not need to exist in a black box in a random employee spreadsheet. We're going to show you guys a methodology for allocations where every number explains itself. So with that, we'll go ahead and introduce CrossView Allocate. Again, this is a platform API for financial allocations, end to end, and on the record. So really quickly, I will first just show you the landing page of our upcoming product. This has not been publicly released yet, but we do feel that it does have a pretty good illustration of the allocation governed loop. Opening a policy, proposing updates, simulating the impacts, approving the run, triaging any exceptions, and then finally posting it to your general ledger. To illustrate the platform APIs, we actually spun up a simulated Workday environment that shows the traditional workflow, payroll accounting adjustments. Typically, a staff accountant would need to come in and make every single, adjustment manually, in order to really get a sense of the impact, not only for your direct cost, but your F&A, indirect costs. Given, certain sizes of allocation runs, this could be an extremely tedious, process, um, very opaque, as Rob alluded to, and oftentimes, um, just at the mercy of some kind of obscure knowledge that, one or a handful of employees at your organization might have. So using our platform APIs, we can actually generate a policy library. In this case, we're going to show changes to 2 different policies. These are all versioned policies. As soon as you update any value of any of these policies, the version will be bumped. In this case, we'll look at the NIH salary cap, as well as the NIH F&A rate. So as I mentioned earlier in the year, NIH issued new guidelines which bumped the cap from $221,900 to $228,000 flat. This is the amount of salary that can be allocated to a given NIH award. So we've gone ahead and made the update here. And then just for illustration, we'll also bump the F&A rate from 54.5% to 56%. Now that we've locked in our policy changes, we can actually preview the impact. So these are using our live cross-view allocate APIs. We can see exactly what the direct costs under the previously existing policies were, how those direct costs will be defined after the policies go into effect, along with the deltas for both direct costs and F&A, indirect costs. So, we can see very clearly for every worker whose effort has been applied to an NIH grant, the effects of that policy change. Let's go ahead and say that we're satisfied with these policy updates. We'll publish it, then we'll replay our fact set, and we can see that all of the allocation lines are now generated, right? But more so, like, not only were they generated, we can actually drill into them and see the exact fact-derived mathematics, arithmetic that went into generating those allocation lines, step by step, right? So the first step was, given that we changed those 2 policies, apply the new NIH salary cap math. Then we have indirect costs, which are dependent on the direct cost, and we also updated the F&A rate for those indirect costs. So there's really kind of 2 shifts occurring there with the F&A rate. One, the underlying direct cost shifted because we updated the salary cap, and then 2, the actual F&A rate itself was updated to 56%. So it's very easy to explain how an allocated line was arrived at. And this is all deterministic and really immutable. Every element that went into those allocation, the generation of those allocation lines is captured as a hash that cannot be altered in any way. And those hashes consist of the input data, the policy versions, the individual versions of each policy that were updated, as well as the actual version of our APIs that were used to generate those allocation lines. The end result is really this evidence pack, which is a manifest hash, really a hash that consists of a package of all the component hashes, right? So just from this singular manifest hash, we're able to derive the complete set of inputs policies, our allocation software, that we can then hand to an auditor or an internal controller. So just as an example, we'll shift over to an audit role. We'll paste that manifest hash here. We'll verify the receipt, and we can see that it's immediately verified. From this hash alone, we're able to see all of the snapshot data, which is really the employee's annual salary plus um, the effort percentage that they have been assigned to a given award. From that evidence pack, we're actually able to see the specific policy sets and their version and effective date and actual raw values that went into generating those allocation lines. And then finally, we get the allocation lines themselves with that same level of step-by-step explainability and drill back that we demonstrated in our simulation run previously. So we do feel this is a pretty compelling kind of product offering that really helps remove any ambiguity from allocations. Everything is performed in the cloud. Everything is extracted completely from spreadsheets. It's replayable. It's defensible. And really, we feel that it offers pretty significant, value to financial operations teams that have any kind of allocation processes across any industry, as Rob broke down earlier. So with that, that concludes the demo. I think Julie will take the screen share back, and then I'll continue with really, what our next, what the next options could be for kind of moving forward and evaluating your own allocation processes. So from that demo, there's really three things that you can hand to an auditor. One, traceability. I showed you that every line that was generated from our allocation governed loop can be drilled back to its source. You can see the rule that was fired, the input data that fed it. We omitted the approval chain for just the purposes of a quick demo, but we do have complete support for signed, like cryptographically signed approvals that really do serve as solid audit defense. The second thing we showed was determinism. Just via that manifest hash, we were able to produce the exact set of inputs that went into a allocation run, and that gives us the ability to replay it. A replay produces the same exact numbers to the cent. If I were to rerun that demo, it would be completely identical. The results would be completely identical to what we just saw. This means that any upgrades to our software, any migrations, whether it's on the customer side, changing their accounting system, as long as the input facts remain the same, which they do in our case because we take a snapshot of the input data. If you change vendors, all of these potential shifts are guaranteed to never change your outputs by accident. So really a pretty fundamental shift from that spreadsheet-based from those spreadsheet-based workflows that Rob was alluding to earlier. And then finally, governance. Nothing in our, actually, if we could go back to the previous slide, Julie. Nothing post without an authorized approval. So earlier I was talking about the governed loop and the ability to put forward very robust approval chains, cryptographically signed, as I mentioned. Segregation of duties is enforced by our allocation engine. Every policy change can be stood up with approvals required. Any post to a a journal or GL can require approvals depending on your organization's own requirements, in addition to kind of the policies of the funder. So these controls are enforced by construction, by very strict contracts within our Allocate software. They're not promised in a policy doc or kind of buried in a controller's head somewhere. All the governance is built in to our framework, just as a first-class artifact. Next slide, please. So in terms of where to go next, we're really hoping to kind of surface customers and organizations that have these allocation problems, of a similar shape to what Rob demonstrated. And part of that is CrossView, offering a maturity assessment on your organization's allocation workflows. Ideally, this would lead to a follow-up conversation, bringing finance and compliance teams from your organization into one room to walk through the highest pain allocation processes of your organization together. And we're hoping that this can also allow us to perform a scoped pilot on your data, prove the drill back and identical replay guarantees on a single real period. And we're convinced that once you see how seamlessly our platform APIs work against your data, against a real period, accounting period, that our platform APIs will essentially prove their value very clearly. So the main takeaway is that CrossView Allocate, which again is our platform APIs for financial allocations, CrossView Allocate makes allocation fast, governed, and provable across every industry that splits money. So with that, we'll pass it back to Julie. There may have been some questions in the chat.
Andrew, yeah, nothing yet. So just a reminder to use that chat function if you have questions, and we can answer them there. If anybody has any.
We'll keep it open for a little bit longer. In the meantime, Julie, do you want to?
Yep. I'm going to go to my thank you slide. Yeah, if you're not comfortable answering the question in the chat as well, you can always email us. You can use the QR code, or the email is contact@crossview.com. And then we do invite you to learn more from our InnoView webinar series. All of our past webinars are up on our website. And if you also scan that QR code, it'll take you right to the page.
Cool. Thank you, Julie.
Yeah, thank you. Thank both of you and Rob. This was a great session.
Yeah. Rob, any final thoughts before we adjourn?
Yeah, this is very exciting because I know that this is an age-old concern that doesn't seem to be getting easier. And, that transparency has always been the thing that's missing, right? Anytime you have to break a process to pull it out to the side to run something on it, there's risk. And if there's a way to incorporate that into the workflow, with the transparency, then it's a win. So this is very exciting, and I really appreciate it. Andrew, thank you for taking us through that.
Yeah, thank you for your industry breakdowns. And again, if you have questions that you're not comfortable asking in the chat, Julie has the contact information there, and we're very happy to sit with you and your team to address any concerns that you might have about your organization's own allocation practices.
And with that, if there's no questions, we will end the call. Thank you all for joining us today, and do reach out if you have any additional questions or would like more information. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, all. Bye-bye.